First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here participating in such a prestigious meeting. I would like to especially thank Dr. Mejia for the invitation, and I hope we can discuss aspects of the study and of SAH and ICH in general. Just to make sure, Jose, how long do I have?
Excuse me, Professor, give me 1 second. I think that around 15 minutes, but I will confirm you.
Yeah, 15 is enough, I think.
20 minutes, Professor. 20 minutes, and we will have 10 minutes more for questions.
Okay. Initially, I apologize to give the lecture in English, but I think you would not understand my Portuguese, and my Spanish is not good enough. So we can maybe discuss in Spanish afterwards. So the possible study is a prospective observational study of clinical management and long-term outcomes of patients with subarachnoid hemorrhage and intracerebral hemorrhage in Latin America. This study was designed back in 2018, and we have been discussing the details of a study in this form for a while, and I'll get into the details later. Just to put into context, the problem of SAH and ICH in South and Central America, but in Latin America in general. This is a slide from a paper published in 2019, studying the incidence of aneurysm as SAH in the world. And I highlighted here data from South and Central America. Initially, we can see that we have small studies and few studies and small studies looking at the incidence of this disease. What the study shows in general is that the incidence has been declining worldwide, but this is not necessarily true for our countries here in South and Central America. And the main reason that the study found for this reduction in the incidence of SAH was an improvement in control of blood pressure and other risk factors such as smoking prevalence. The other issue that concerns hemorrhagic stroke in South and Central America is the case fatality or outcomes of SAH. Here we see two examples from Argentina and Chile, showing that the case fatality in the hospital or after 30 days is around 40 to 50%. This is higher than cohorts from developed countries. And what we have in general in the literature is a lot of data from Asia, Europe, and the US, showing a progressive reduction in mortality and a progressive improvement in functional outcomes over the last 10 to 20 years. And I think we still don't know if this is true for developing countries. So the first thing our group in Rio did was we studied a subset of a large prospective study in ICU patients called the Orchestra study. This has been published quite a few times, looking at organization and structure of ICUs in Brazil. From this study, we identified 1,000 ICH patients and 1,000 SAH patients, and we tried to look at some characteristics of these patients. This was published this year in the end of last year in Neurocritical Care. So this was a prospective cohort retrospective analysis with a big limitation, which was we do not have neurological specific data on these patients. This is a general ICU database. But we have a lot of patients, 1,000 from 45 ICUs all over the country. And we had some admission characteristics, comorbidities, systemic clinical severity, and organ dysfunction and support. Mainly what we found here was that the in-hospital mortality was 34%. We could identify some independent predictors of in-hospital mortality. Another big limitation is that we didn't have long-term follow-up or functional outcomes. Interestingly, in this study, the volume of patients treated in each center was not an independent predictor of at least hospital mortality. This is another study that is being prepared to be submitted. This includes SAH patients from 2 reference centers in Brazil. One is ours in Rio, and the other one is Hospital Cristo Redentor in the south of Brazil, with Dr. Carla Rinkowski as the PI. And this was an observational prospective study, now with more detailed neurospecific data, and also evaluating long-term follow-up. What we show here is that the hospital mortality was 24%, which is more in line with published cohorts from developed countries. We show a poor hospital, a long-term poor outcome evaluated after 6 to 12 months of 40%, which is also similar to other cohorts. And here in this colorful graph on the left, we can see that patients transition from good grades to poor outcome, and for not so good grades or poor grades on admission to good outcomes. And we are interested in what aspects of our management and treatment and evaluation could interfere with these different trajectories. As main conclusions of this study, we raise a few issues that could be addressed by the possible study and future assessments that we can do. So we demonstrate reasonable long-term outcomes, but the majority of patients received delayed aneurysm occlusion, mainly because they get to the reference center where neurosurgery is available late in the course of their disease. Many arrive many days after the ictus or the aneurysm bleed. Also, the majority of our patients in Brazil, at least in public reference centers, are still clipped instead of coil. And so these results highlight some opportunities for outcome improvement. And basically, that's what we intend with the possible study. Have a highlight and have a more clear picture of the reality and the situation of hemorrhagic stroke in countries, in developing countries from South America and from Latin America in general. So I'll talk a little bit about the details of the study, and then I'll show you some results, and we can discuss afterwards. So this study was, as I told you in the beginning, we have been discussing a prospective study on hemorrhagic stroke for many years. The idea came from these coordinators here, with a lot of incentive from Jose Suarez from Neurocritical Care Society, Jorge Mejia from Colombia, and Nelson Maldonado from Ecuador. And our team in Brazil is composed by me, Cassia Higi, and Fernando Boza. Also, the study has the support of the Brazilian Research and Intensive Care Network, which is a prolific network for clinical research in Brazil that had a very important participation in randomized clinical trials recently during the COVID-19 pandemic, and supported us with access to potential recruiters and other aspects of the study. This was designed to be an international observational study, as I described before. The objectives are these described here. So we're interested in describing the prevalence of SAH and ICH and their seasonal variability in different countries, in different regional situations, and different environments. Describe the organization and structure of hospitals caring for patients with hemorrhagic stroke, which we think is a very important aspect of the study, and that may influence very closely patients' outcomes. Describe the clinical management and complications that patients develop in the ICU. And finally, have a long-term assessment of functional outcomes of these patients and try to understand which aspects of organization and management are related to these outcomes. The design was divided in 3 phases. So the first phase was performed between 2018 and 2019. We did a survey describing hospital characteristics and the volume of patients with hemorrhagic stroke treated per center. This was concluded during the beginning of 2019. The phase 2 would be the data collection, which was planned initially to be performed in 4 time windows of 1 month each over a period of 1 year. The idea was to capture different seasons of the year and try to relate these seasons to potential characteristics and outcomes of hemorrhagic stroke patients. We performed 2 time windows in the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020. And after that, the pandemic started and the study stopped. In the phase 3 would be outcomes assessment after 6 and 12 months. And this was planned for being done by centralized in 1 Spanish-speaking center and 1 Portuguese-speaking center through a telephone interview, basically assessing modified ranking scores after 6 and after 12 months. So we concluded the first phase, which was the survey. 42 complete responses were received, and these centers started to prepare to be active centers and enroll patients. In the Spanish-speaking countries, we had 28 responses from 6 countries, with 25 centers with high volume of hemorrhagic strokes, more than 20 patients per year. In 2019, the first month of data collection was October. We had these countries enrolling patients, so 8 countries: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay. I think it's not here, but also Venezuela. So 9 countries. And some enrolled in 2019 and others were included in February of 2020 and enrolled more patients. This is the number of patients that were included in the study. We had 244 patients included. The first 5 recruiters include 3 hospitals from Brazil and 2 hospitals from 1 from Colombia, and another Spanish-speaking, another center from a Spanish-speaking country. And I'll show you some results of these 244 patients. And the main enroller here is, as I said, Cristo Redentor, which is a reference center for SAH in the south of the country, led by Dr. Carla Minkowski. And the second one is the Brain Institute in Rio, and the third one is Fundación Valle de Lili in Colombia. These are the numbers of patients included. So the majority of patients were included from Brazil, especially because in October 2019, most of the Spanish-speaking centers were not active, and we had a slow inclusion in the second period. We have data for 235 patients, and you can see here on the right side that we have a lot of patients with incomplete data, which is a problem that we will have to address in the future when we discuss the analysis of these patients. In terms of hemorrhagic stroke type, almost half and half, but more SAHs than ICHs. And we have a lot of patients with unknown. So these unknown are patients that were included in the database with their identification, but no clinical data was inserted. Probably centers were leaving to insert clinical data afterwards, and right after our second inclusion period, the pandemic started, and probably efforts were diverged to other situations. In terms of age strata, we have the majority of patients between 40 and 69 years old, which is the profile of patients with SAH, with the majority of female patients. We have also some incomplete data, but this is an interesting age profile and different from other studies on hemorrhagic stroke. In terms of outcome, we do not have long-term outcome. The telephone interviews were not performed. What we have is hospitals discharge data, and even for hospital discharge, we have a lot of missing data, probably for the same reason that I described before. The mortality of patients with hospital discharge data was 24%, which is actually similar to the data that we had in Brazil, and in line with data from other developed countries, from US, Europe, and Asia. So we have a lot of challenges going ahead concerning the possible study. We have discussed when to restart enrollment. We had changed the plan of 4 time windows to 5 or 6 because the first one was a slow one, and we wanted to capture other time windows and seasons. We have to reassess that and define how many time windows we will collect data for. We need to decide the new start date. The initial proposal is between April and June 2022. And we still need to discuss how to use data from patients enrolled in 2019 and 2020. We have a lot of missing data from their hospital stay, and we do not have post-discharge assessment via telephone interview of their functional outcomes. And also, a challenge that was present in the beginning of the study, and here we need to improve, is structure our centralized long-term assessment, both in Spanish speaking countries and in Portuguese speaking countries.